The College Football Playoff Committee just released their Week 3 playoff rankings, and I already know we all have mixed feelings about them, so I'll give my reaction. And we also have some questions to answer from, as a part of the Q&A for reaching 500 subscribers. We've got questions from Mason Tinkler, Jack, I'm going to mispronounce this name probably, Jack Schulze, and from Whatever to Watch. So we'll get to those as soon as I reveal the rankings. Now, I didn't write down all of them, but I wrote down the ones that still have a shot at going to the playoff in USC. Because USC's ranking is kind of interesting. So, of course, we all know Alabama was going to be number 1. No doubt about it. Number 2, we knew Ohio State was going to be number 2. There was no doubt about that either. But once we get down the list, it gets really, really surprising. Number 3, we've got Michigan. Then number 4, we have Clemson. 5, Louisville. And 6, Washington. That was the most shocking thing of the night. I'm surprised Washington only fell 2 spots after losing to USC by 13 points at home. That really surprises me. And then we have the 2 lost teams. At 7, Wisconsin. 8, Penn State. 9, Oklahoma. And 10, Colorado. So that's your top 10. Now I also wrote down at 11, Oklahoma State. 12, Utah. 13, USC. And 14, West Virginia. Now, this is kind of an interesting development as what the committee decided to do this week. Based on the patterns of the teams, they wanted to give the 1-loss teams ahead of the 2-loss teams. Even though Wisconsin's 2 losses were by 7 points to Michigan and 7 points against Ohio State, that one went into overtime. Penn State's 2 losses were to Pittsburgh and Michigan. Oklahoma's 2 losses were to Houston in Week 1, when Houston was number 15, and Ohio State. But that was by 21. So I can see why the committee didn't want to bump Oklahoma up too much. Number 10, Colorado, whose 2 losses were to Michigan and USC. However, Colorado did compete with Michigan early on in the game. In fact, I believe they were up 21-7 at some point in that game. And USC, they were the underdog anyway. USC was favored to win that game. Now, Oklahoma State is kind of interesting. And we will address it because it's one of the Q&A questions to answer. The loss to Central Michigan, the controversial loss, many they should get that win back. And with Baylor. Baylor has just gone down a steep hill the last 3 weeks of the year. And they've lost the quarterback. They basically just lost their lackluster. They just don't have just high morale anymore. The morale of Baylor is just really low. Utah's their two losses were to California and Washington a couple of weeks ago. USC's 3 losses were to Alabama Week 1, but that was 52-6 to Stanford, who they climbed back into the rankings. They're now 24, and Utah. And West Virginia's 1 loss was to Oklahoma State by 17 points. So really, there's probably 13 teams that have a chance of making the playoff right now. However, I did say that if you were Penn State, you needed Pittsburgh to beat Clemson, which that happened, which I didn't. Penn State moved up 2 spots, but that's because they were in a dogfight against Indiana. And Wisconsin's still hanging in there as a 2-loss team. I mean, Wisconsin's probably got the best 2 losses in college football this year that you can ask for. Their 2 losses were to the 2 and 3 team. So those are the best losses you can have. So Wisconsin's like in the best position of these 2-loss teams to make the playoff. Let's kind of go over why the committee probably did what they did. Now, we can't really read the committee's mind. In fact, the committee won't tell us anything directly to our faces. But here's what I probably can tell you. They probably decided to stick Michigan at number 3. Because realistically, Michigan probably should have won that game, but things just went a whole lot differently. And plus, let's look at who Michigan ended up beating. They beat Wisconsin, who's ranked 7th. They beat Penn State, who is ranked 8th. and they beat Colorado, who was ranked 10th. So that's why they kept Michigan number 3, because they have 3 wins against top 10 teams in the rankings. Why did they put Clemson only down to 4? They lost to an unranked Pittsburgh team at home. They almost lost to NC State at home, and they had a 1-possession game against Troy, who should be in the top 25, but they get no respect as they're a group of 5 teams. Well, let's just look at what Clemson's done. They beat Florida State on the road. That's probably their best win of the year. Louisville, they beat them at home. So that's probably their marquee win that they need. There's a difference between a marquee victory and their biggest win. Their biggest win was Florida State. That was the rivalry game. Many think that was a game that Florida State should have won. Many people think that NC State should have beaten Clemson. Many people think Troy should have beaten Clemson. So why Clemson is still at number 4? It's for that reason, because they beat Louisville at 5. In fact, that's the difference between Clemson and Louisville right now for the 4th spot. It was that head-to-head matchup that mattered in the month of October. And why was Washington only fell 2 spots? So basically, Clemson lost and moved down 2 spots. Washington lost by 13, only moved down 2 spots. But Michigan lost on the road by a single point, but stayed the same. I'm sure margin of victory may have something to do with it at the end of the day, but it's more about head-to-head instead of margin of victories. So some of these teams are probably going to try running up the score for nothing. Like Louisville, if they have a chance, they're probably going to try to run up the score against Houston for no apparent reason, because they think that margin of victory will come into play. I think margin of victory only has about maybe a 10 to 15% impact of the rankings. And I think it comes down to this formula. Let me write it down real quick. Here's what I ultimately think it is. Let me just write this down so it makes sense to everybody. I think it's about 10% margin of victory. I think 70% of it is head-to-head matchup. Which kind of what we referred to earlier with Michigan beating Wisconsin, Penn State, and Colorado all in the top 10. And the other 20% of it is kind of the strength of the schedule. I probably spelled schedule wrong, but oh well. So that's what I ultimately think the formula is. Could there be another formula? Probably. So I think it has zero effect on the AP's rankings. I think it has zero impact on the coaches poll. I think it has zero impact on the Harris poll. Whether or not they still do that poll, I don't know. But I think it has zero impact on other polls. Because the committee knows, unlike the Associated Press and other coaches, which teams really played their hearts out in some certain amount of games. So let's get to the questions to answer. The first one from Mason Tinkler. What do you think about Oklahoma State? They beat Pitt, which is now a good win, and they should have only one loss. What do you think? Well, here's what I think. This is kind of a 2-part answer. Pitt is now a good win because they have beaten Clemson and they have beaten Penn State. So that is a great win to have, and I think that is why the committee put Oklahoma State at 11. I think that's kind of why they're there. They're kind of waiting to see what happens toward the end. So I think Oklahoma State can still sneak into the playoff, though. Because if you look, Wisconsin and Penn State, 7 and 8, they could still play each other for the Big Ten championship. Colorado, they could lose to Washington State this week. Oklahoma State, they'll play each other at the end of the year. Or maybe West Virginia could beat Oklahoma. And that could. But I think if you're Oklahoma State, you may need... I don't know who to root for if you're an Oklahoma State fan. Are they rooting for Oklahoma or are they rooting for West Virginia? Because Oklahoma may be your rival, but you could need them to win. based on the competition of the strength of schedule the committee would want. They'd be satisfied with. So it's kind of hard being an Oklahoma State fan this week because you don't know which team to root for because one of those two teams is going to get eliminated from the playoff contention. But I think you'd want Oklahoma to win this one, though. But they should have one loss only. But the record still says they have 2 losses. But they shouldn't have been in that situation in the first place against Central Michigan because all Mason Rudolph should have done was just run back to the other end zone instead of just chucking the football way out of bounds. That shouldn't have happened. You should have at least just go down, or you could have maybe just punted the ball. You could have punted. The punt would have lasted at least 5 seconds. They could have punted the football. They could have just ran to the other end zone and give a safety to end the game. They could have done a bunch. So that's why I think Oklahoma State, that's why they shouldn't get their win back. Although, yes, the rules may be rules, but they shouldn't have been in that situation in the first place. I mean, any team would say, just punt the football with 8 seconds left. Because that gave Central Michigan an untimed down with decent field position instead of maybe only 1 second to get like 80-something yards. So that was just a miscue in Oklahoma State, and sadly, it's probably going to cost them a spot in the College Football Playoff. Although last year, I remember we were talking about how good Oklahoma State was when they were 10-0. That they could have snuck into the playoff, they could get in, they could compete with the big boys. But then they lost the 2 games at the end of the year to Baylor and Oklahoma. So really, let's not put Oklahoma State as an elite team yet. Let's not put them as one of the teams to compete with the big boys just yet. Because we all thought the same thing last year, but then they went on that huge blunder to end the year. The next one from Jack Schulze. Do you think Wisconsin could run the table with the defense they have? Do you think Wisconsin still makes it into the playoff if they end up playing Penn State in the Big Ten championship game and winning it? So 2 answers to the question. First one is yes, I think Wisconsin is definitely capable of running the table. I definitely think they can finish the regular season out 10-2 and make it to the Big Ten championship. In fact, I said at the beginning of the year that Wisconsin was going to win the Big Ten. It was going to be shocking to people, but it was going to happen. Although right now, I don't know. I mean, I don't think Alex Hornibrook is the quarterback that you could use in like a Big Ten championship game kind of situation, one of those big-time games. I think you need to go with Bart Houston. But do I think Wisconsin still makes it into the playoff if they end up playing Penn State in the Big Ten championship game and winning it? Personally, it's hard to say. If I'd have to choose right now, I would say probably not because they lost to Ohio State and Michigan, but those two are going to play each other. But Michigan still controls its own destiny. So if you're a Wisconsin fan, you want Michigan to beat Ohio State. That's what you want. That way, you would have Michigan versus Wisconsin in the Big Ten championship game, and then you want to beat Michigan in the Big Ten championship. If Michigan beats Ohio State, and if Wisconsin beats Michigan in the Big Ten championship, then Wisconsin's in. At least that's just my perspective of it. Although I think if it came down to Louisville or Wisconsin for the 4th spot, I think it would go to Louisville. Because Louisville kind of had a sloppy game against Clemson. They only lost by 6 points. And plus, they only lost the year, but that was their only big-time opponent this year. So it's kind of hard. But I think they would choose Louisville at the end because Lamar Jackson has really taken college football by storm this year, and he's the Heisman frontrunner. It may not have anything to do with it, but I think the committee is trying to set up matchups that the fans would want to see. The ones that the fans would just pay tickets for. Because I honestly think the fans would want to see Lamar Jackson on New Year's Eve than a 2-loss Wisconsin team that doesn't have the best offense in the Big Ten, but a good defense, though. So I think, yes, I did reveal the formula, and I don't think anything has anything to do with it, but I think there could be some things to think about. Like you can think about ratings, the ticket sales, the popularity, the hype. You can think of all those factors. But I don't think they're the major factors behind the rankings. I think it's just something that they think about to add to it. All right. I hope that answered your question, Jack. I mean, if it didn't, I'll try to address it again next week. And finally, from whatever to watch, which teams? This is kind of an interesting one. It's one to think about. Which team's kicker will get more Twitter followers? Iowa's, Georgia's, Pittsburgh, or Ole Miss's kicker? Okay, we can easily eliminate one of these answers. We can easily eliminate Ole Miss's kicker getting the most Twitter followers because it wasn't the kicker that led the victory over Texas A&M. That was the redshirt freshman quarterback Shea Patterson that led the comeback victory against Texas A&M. It wasn't the kicker, so we can eliminate Ole Miss right out of that picture. I mean, Georgia's kicker, although he did miss a field goal though. However, his 2 field goals were kind of the difference. They did win 13-7, but they did have a pick 6 and 2 field goals. But I think we might eliminate Georgia's. So it comes down to Iowa's and Pittsburgh's. Honestly, I think if you're someone that likes the player that just never gives up, just keeps trying, you would go with Pittsburgh's. But if you're just following a kicker on Twitter because like, oh, this guy has a great life, like this is interesting, let's follow this guy around, you would go with Iowa's kicker. It's really, you can go with either Iowa's kicker or Pittsburgh's kicker to follow on Twitter. But I think if we wanted to follow anybody on Ole Miss on Twitter, you would want to follow Shea Patterson on Twitter because he's the one that led the victory over Texas A&M. If you wanted to follow anybody on Georgia on Twitter, you would probably follow Nick Chubb. So that was kind of an interesting question from whatever to watch. He's a loyal Georgia fan, so I think I understand why he put Georgia's kicker into the question. Well, that is going to do it. Be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Also, comment your thoughts on who you think your top 4 should be. I thought I gave mine out last week, but if I didn't, here it is again. Alabama, Ohio State, Louisville, and Wisconsin. It's not that I think that Michigan doesn't deserve to be ranked number 3. Sure they do. But if you lose a game, you need to move down a little bit. That's why you got to lose your games early in the year. But originally the way I saw it, before we kind of wrap it up, I know I tried to wrap it up, but I apologize. My original thought was between Michigan and Clemson. Neither of these teams are out yet. What I was originally going to say is, one of these 2 teams, they're going to choke in their conference championship game, and the other is going to lose in the national championship to Alabama. That's what I anticipated. That's what I was going to tell you. But now that the rankings came out, it's like, they can both still get in. Because Michigan, Clemson, they still control their own destiny. If they win their prospective conference championships, they'll be in. So those 2 teams control their own destiny still. I think Louisville will control its own destiny as well, because either Ohio State or Michigan's going to lose. So as long as Louisville can beat Houston and they can beat Kentucky, they're in. So Michigan, Clemson, Louisville all control their own destiny. Ohio State, their fate is just in other teams' hands right now. So that is going to do it. Like, subscribe to the channel, share this video with your friends, family, share it on your social media accounts. That is all I have for you today. Have a great night.